everyone. I'm Barbara Trevino and I lead partnerships at Sugar. And I am joined here today by one of my former colleagues and work husband, Kyle Jackson. Kyle, I want you to do a quick intro about yourself and just let the audience know who you are.
Yeah, I mean, as thank you for the intro. My name is Kyle, and I've been a business systems leader for some time now. I'm currently on a sabbatical, which has been very nice. But yeah, at Seismic, especially Barbara and I spent a lot of times working on lots of revenue operations related projects, mostly around partnership, and so I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kyle. I feel like this conversation has become and come full circle. I think 5 years ago, you and I didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, and let alone talking about it 5 years later, now where it's a very relevant conversation that many companies are having. And you and I
Mhm.
learned, I think, through trial and error when we were first uh tasked with understanding what marketplace meant for the business. And ultimately, I think that's also why you and I became really close colleagues and what we refer to each other as work husband and wife, which is that we were working on this project like if it was our baby to make sure it was successful. And
Yeah.
even in those early stages, 5 years ago, I feel like Marketplace was still relatively kind of new. I know we hear and talk about it a lot more now. And now I work for Sugar, a company that specializes in companies getting listed on Marketplace. But um, going back to those early stages, that was also the beginning of my career at Seismic. And so I think you understand the challenges that I was going, an uphill battle, and a partner person, a partner ops person trying to understand the importance of marketplace, let alone trying to get buy-in from the entire ops org to support me. And frankly, you were the only one that raised their hand and decided to help. And I always wondered why. Like what was it about that particular project and all the other things that I was trying to do that like having a lead object or custom object, all these things, PRM. What was it about Marketplace particularly that you decided to help with and why?
Yeah, sure. I think it was. I mean, it's a bit of an interesting problem and one where seismic, of course, and I think most organizations would struggle to place like who necessarily should do this because I mean, you could have your product team kind of do the work to set things up in marketplace, and you might really want to do that if you have super custom experience within your app, but it definitely kind of I think the seismic was obviously outside of the engineering team's realm of responsibility. And yeah, like just the way that I think of business systems being the engineering org for the business, it was clear that it couldn't be done by a savvy um, person on the partner team, much more technical and complicated than that, but also yeah, not something that you would give to your product. Like business systems was the one to help. I was, yeah, like kind of, I thought, I will admit, I thought it might be something that was easier, and it ends up turning out to be, a much bigger endeavor, in part due to my kind of, I guess, just initial expectations and how a system like that would operate. Um, but yeah, I felt like it was ours to solve, and we did a lot through the process, didn't we?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think we hear a lot, even back then, a lot of what I heard was marketplace is easy. Marketplace should be easy. It's definitely easy for a customer that's procuring through marketplace but for a company that's implementing it for the first time, it could be really difficult. And admittedly, too, I,
Yeah.
I didn't know that it was going to be that difficult. It was a project that I inherited from the partner manager aligned to Microsoft, and he was super focused on building the relationship. And this was just one of the many components of building that relationship among with other programmatic things. And I raised my hand to support from an ops perspective. And I also didn't know the lift required. It was more than just looking and going into Partner Center and looking at what makes sense to put on a listing, because the technical piece is what really, or the part that we really didn't understand even back then, because there's a lot of things I recall that you and I were going through from a technical perspective. I was doing all the front end listing stuff, and you were figuring out, I don't know if it was like a webhook or like a landing page. I don't even remember, but what was that experience like for you when you finally sunk your teeth into it and realized this is probably something that we should work with other people to support us on?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think my initial question, and this perhaps might have been perhaps a bit naive, was that, the marketplaces would provide structure through which you would be able to, have a landing page where people can select from your subscription offerings and, handle the transaction in its entirety. Uh, and that I think they're trying to accommodate much more kind of flexibility for across all of their customers, which are very diverse. And it's more a set of APIs that you use that you build landing page that you build, host, design, and support to the marketplace infrastructure where you can kind of interact with the listing you've set up. And I think that challenges we had was kind of going, okay, we discovered that there's actually something we have to build for this to work. It's not just a configure a listing. But then we also had the pressure of, this to transact through the marketplace very quickly. I think a lot of people may kind of first think they need to support marketplace when they've got a big potential deal and the prospect says, "Hey, can I pay via the marketplace?" And you want to say, "Sure, we can support, give us money, we'll figure it out." So that kind of put us in a position of like, well, dang, we have like a whole IT engineering project that we've got to deliver as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
and so
definitely
yeah,
I
that
definitely
that that
recall that. I remember, and I
yeah
think that's kind of normal, or an expectation of most marketplace initiatives come up because a customer is interested in buying, and usually that customer is already well into the sales cycle, and it may or may not be one of those non-negotiables for their company to transact through marketplace. And so if your company is not ready, that is a very stressful position to be in. And that was certainly the case for us back then. And
yeah
I remember I feel like it took us, what would you say, like 6 months, maybe a little less than that, to even have something like hodgepodge put together when we worked with the Microsoft engineering team and borrowing their code just for the landing page to be
yeah
able to maybe be ready for that one customer, knowing that we may have had something that could work, but it wasn't ideal.
yeah. I mean, it did take us about 6 months to get to that point. Uh, and yeah, we were trying to see if there was a way collaborating with the resources that Microsoft was thankfully willing to provide. And they were quite helpful, and it was sufficient that we thought, okay, we can commit to doing a transaction or two, should that be the customer would transact. Um, but yeah, I mean, to do it, to have like a permanent, scalable uh, solution where we could, facilitate tens or Microsoft transactions a year would take even longer, and that's kind of ultimately what led us down, bringing on a third party.
Yeah, yeah. I think we initially thought, like, let's just have some homegrown DIY solution in place just to get this deal through the finish line. But we didn't quite
Yeah,
think about all the other aspects that that would probably help operationalize marketplace. And I think that became even more important when Google came to us and asked, or actually Google we were exploring at the time a partnership with Google, and Google said the fastest way that we can probably accelerate this partnership is if you get listed on Google Marketplace. So not only did we have the pressure of refining what we had just done in Azure Marketplace, but then also figuring out how to do the same thing with Google and do it even faster. And that's ultimately, I think, the biggest catalyst for us thinking about working with the third party integrator.
Mhm.
Um, in my
Yeah, and
experience,
I didn't.
oh yeah, go ahead,
I was
Kyle.
gonna say, and I at the time didn't realize that this was a thing for which there would be a SaaS company that would, I guess I thought it was just too unlikely that I would get a result if marketplace listings as a service.
Hmm.
Um, of course, they do more than just kind of host your landing page, so to speak. But yeah, I mean, I was surprised to even find that there were options like that,
Yeah, I think even
which
back then
was good
there
news.
yeah, and even truthfully back then there weren't many providers
Yeah.
doing that, which for me what I was going to say was when we first started evaluating working with a third party integrator, and once we started working with one, it was in the beginning actually still kind of a little painful because you're kind of repeating the process that you had just done
Hmm.
in-house and then working with their teams. And at the time, too, I think it was also a learning curve for even the third party integrator we were working with because they were also new to the market as well. So we experienced some of those growing pains, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not the case now. I think now that marketplace has matured through each cloud provider and therefore also the third party integrators and companies like Sugar, it's really great that these are tools and areas that companies can scale faster. But for us, definitely, we had no idea that these were resources that we could leverage, let alone accelerate that journey. What was the biggest surprise for you working with an integrator or a company that helped us get listed? What was that experience like for you?
It ended up being positive. I think that
Mhm.
there's the obvious benefit of just like, yeah, not having to deploy and support your own infrastructure to run the application, which is, yeah, sure, it's just a landing page to facilitate a transaction and redirect customers back to the marketplace.
Mm.
Um, it but there's possibility for a lot more than that. There's the ability to kind of set multiple listings from a single place on different marketplaces. There's the opportunity to uh, integrate that with your CRM and your kind of like quote to cash system, and then there's kind of room for that tech to help facilitate some of the downstream back office things like RevRec and cash collection and what have you. So I think like, yeah, I was one surprised to hear that we had like an answer immediate problem. But then I came to see the benefits of everything else that a listing management, I don't know, kind of category or
Yeah.
is called, but yeah, it can help with a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was a big surprise for me too, especially being ultimately responsible for managing all the private offers and creating them, having a
Hmm.
centralized platform that could help us manage different listings with different cloud providers and be able to go into the platform and make any product marketing type of updates every time we evolved our product super readily available. And also at the same time, for an ops person to be able to just use a single platform to create the private offers as the deals were flowing through every month, regardless of which cloud provider we were going to be transacting in. So that made it super easy for me from an ops perspective. Although I will say, you being more familiar with all the tech tools and ultimately being responsible for managing a suite of different platforms and different technical processes for the business, there were some aspects that I didn't even think to consider that you and I guess, had to figure out also as we matured through leveraging a different platform and a different process, which was like NetSuite. We used NetSuite, we used Coupa, we used all these different platforms, and centralizing these platforms and processes, I didn't imagine would be something that we had to consider. But I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that, on those kinds of processes as companies start
Mhm.
talking and thinking about these kind of things.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that anytime you add a a different way to transact to your customers, you kind of have to think through the entire end-to-end process from, you first engage with the customer all the way to, collecting cash and doing rev rec. And you have to kind of figure out what along the way has to change to support that. So I remember that in terms of NetSuite, um, there really wasn't too crazy a difference for these transactions, but we realize it's really important for is, reviewing the invoicing and approving, making approvals there. The person doing rev rec, they've got to be aware that this is a marketplace transaction. So that's one thing that we kind of built out when we sync orders from Salesforce to NetSuite, was just a signifier that the payment method was through a marketplace. And then of course that team had to train those people who were processing those orders on what that meant.
Yeah.
If like they had to, getting information about provisioning, slightly different. Getting information about when the billing schedule, when we can expect cash, slightly different. So yeah, just aware that it was a marketplace transaction with a different playbook to act on was the most important thing.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. There were so many moving parts that we didn't realize back then. And another one that impacted us on the rev ops side was Deal Desk. And I think it's really unique and interesting that depending on the company that is implementing Marketplace, you also have to be very close to Deal Desk and even understand the deal structure, because I remember at the time there were a lot more restrictions and limitations in each cloud provider's marketplace that really prevented us from a sales perspective to be able to support customers
Mhm.
with very unique contracts. So that, I think that was one of the things that we overlooked. I think assuming that a marketplace, regardless of cloud provider, would be an exact one-to-one replica of your contracting process.
Right. Yeah, it's probably different now. But yeah, I remember at the time I can't remember which one, but one of the marketplaces didn't support like multi-year deals. So if you want to do
Yes,
a 3-year deal,
yes.
you kind of had to remember. That's probably changed by now,
No,
but there's
yeah,
lots
that's
of things like
definitely
that you have
changed.
to.
That was
Yeah, yeah,
Microsoft. That was about five
yeah.
years
Okay.
ago, where we did have multi-year contracts, and at the time it was only 12-month contracts. So we had to figure out, do we do 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, or
Right.
for us at the time, and I don't think this is super uncommon now. It's definitely supported now, but something as simple as you would assume a delayed start date, delayed
Hmm.
contract start date, which ultimately impacted when you send a private offer to a customer, because the
Yeah.
moment they accept is when the contract starts. So,
Yeah, yeah. And there's differences there. Like I remember a conversation around, and this was a surprise to me that, the the with a marketplace transaction, depending on how you set it up, you may opt to give your customer, you know, in which they could cancel, which depending on your policy around how you recognize bookings, like
Mhm.
a kind of executed transaction may not be booked according to the way you define it.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's a lot of little things like that process and from, deal desk and operations perspective to work through as a team.
Yeah, yeah. And enablement too was one of the biggest challenges, I think. Naturally, we sat in RevOps, which enablement also sat in our org
Mhm.
too. And that was ultimately one of the biggest things to help us also try to drive more more transactions, is making sure that not only were we doing our due diligence from an ops perspective, but bringing enablement naturally onto that journey to help us continue to drive success in marketplace, not just from a technical perspective and teach the go-to-market teams like how to do things a little outside of what they're used to, but also teach them why it was relevant and important.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What was what was your favorite part? Like I know we've gone through a lot of our ups and downs, and I think we both could agree that I at least am very fortunate that we kind of did things the hard way in the beginning, the DIY approach, but that's for not knowing that there were options out there, and now there are even more options, like working with a company like Sugar. Like I wish Sugar existed when we were going through this 5 years ago. I think that would have alleviated a lot of this. And I think definitely now too, from an ops perspective, like it's a no-brainer to make that financial investment in terms of working with a provider that specializes in this kind of thing to offload all of that work to a company that can help really understand all the different moving parts rather than try to assume that responsibility yourself. And we're ops people in the sense that we're evaluating a lot of tech tools all the time. We're very conscious of not procuring our own tools that don't do the same thing. And we're also you from an IT perspective, consolidating a lot of tech tools and saving the company money. So I think that's ultimately why I think the DIY approach is no longer a good investment of time and resources. And now working with a third party like Sugar is definitely probably the most beneficial route to have a new route to market. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. My favorite part, I guess, was I mean, yeah, I was very pleased to discover that we figured out a technical way to do one before we really had a should we require it. But once we realized it and kind of saw a proof of concept that no, we could actually with the team we have, which is resource but lean, we can fully support marketplace transactions. And just like having a win for RevOps and a win for the or for the company, to just kind of like open that channel because transacting through marketplace was a very important part of a handful of significantly sized deals every quarter. So yeah, I mean the fact that we were able to, with the resources we had, ultimately be able to say, yeah, we can do it. We can do it well. If the customer says marketplace, don't worry about it. Just fill that out in the quote, and we'll handle it from there.
Yeah, I think we
It's
definitely,
good.
after a while, realized for sure that instead of thinking about marketplace as a burden, it was more so really after a while, really one of those key things that help us scale and also a force multiplier for the business. Working with different cloud providers, building our network and co-selling after doing so many transactions after a period of time, really working with their teams and co-selling and seeing success over time. I think that was for me the biggest surprise is that marketplace became very, very, very important, not just for us to support customers, but also in building our relationships from a partner perspective and
Mhm.
ultimately helping us all work in tandem together with the provider that knows what they're doing and then taking that stress off of your teams that are already supporting customers in different parts of the business and in other areas. So I think at the end of the day, using a cloud marketplace provider like Sugar and also entrusting them to help support your business also be successful from a co-sell perspective is very equally important. So uh, yeah. Any final thoughts? I think it's very clear that at least for me that this was I always joked in my career and even now I always have said like marketplace is one of those things that at least from the beginning of our time, marketplace is always one of those things that will haunt me in every career in every company that I move on to, and now I work for at the at the integrator, Sugar, nonetheless, which is great. But that just means that it's just very important for every business, and that it's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah,
And
I mean, I don't have much to add other than, there's just no need to be afraid of if and when your customers want to transact on the marketplace. I think that, you and your team can probably manage it, with the right kind of tools. So,
yeah, agreed.
yeah.
And one anecdote that I thought about was this is in a way a digital transformation for a lot of companies. I think we're seeing and have seen for over 10 years now a lot of tech companies moving to cloud. And I think that's becoming from going from, like traditional uh models over to the cloud. And this is just an extension of that. Once you're on
Oh
cloud,
yeah.
then the next step is marketplace. Join cloud marketplace.
Yeah. And some places are even, they're selling via marketplace as their primary or even only
Yeah.
method.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, Sugar
you know,
being that prime example, we are a cloud
right.
marketplace company first, and we only
Yep.
do cloud marketplace transactions from a business perspective
Yep.
because it's the
Yep.
easiest method. Well, we've also
Yep.
figured it out, but it
True.
definitely is a faster way to procure, that's for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, Kyle, thank you so much for this conversation, and it makes me just think about all the times that all the late nights burning through the the midnight oil trying to make this successful, and now it feels
Hmm.
that that was just yesterday, and now fast forward to where we're at now, and it's like it's pretty amazing. So I'm glad that we did this journey together, and even more amazing that we're still doing it.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And I hope this has served as a great understanding of how a marketplace journeys, regardless of whether you're big or small, you kind of have to figure out what's best for your company and get and use the right resources. And so from just anecdotally from all my past lives, I definitely, if I could do this all over again, I'd work with a company like Sugar from the very beginning than have to do it all ourselves. Awesome. Thank you.